last time there seemed to be kind of reluctance to ask questions. So I really invite you to ask anything you want, and if I can't answer it, I'll let you know. Personal, not personal, just feel free to anything that you like to explore. I have some kind of general outline. So, in our society, in our culture, as we've grown up, we live in a world, all of us live in a world of duality. We're just caught up in all kinds of dualities. Good and bad, am I liked or not liked? Better and worse, pleasure, pain, success, failure. And we're evaluating ourselves on all these dualities. Beautiful, ugly, me, not me, what's me and what's not me, what's mine and what's not mine. Our whole consciousness is constructed around duality. And we've learned as kids, you know, what's how good to be, what I want to be, what I don't want to be, and we sort of pick on ego ideals, things that we would like to accomplish or be like, and then we try to reject whatever it is that's the opposite of that. It's rare that we embrace, I'm good and bad. I like to be good and bad, or I like to be successful and not successful, or to really explore and own these opposite qualities. We tend to like one and to avoid the other. Obviously, pleasure and pain. We want pleasure and we don't want pain, most of us. And then given all these opposites that we've constructed, we may assume that that's just the way the world is, but it's really our construction. It's our common shared delusion of what's real. And so within all this, we try to achieve what we think will be fulfilling for us, and we might look for something, whatever will make us happy. We start out with, well, I'm not happy, but if I do this, or I achieve this, or have this, then I'll be happy. And we spend our life, if happiness is what we're looking for, and most of us, that's one of the things we're looking for, we spend our life trying to find what makes us happy. And then we find what we thought would make us happy, and maybe it does temporarily, and then it just no longer does it, and then we look for something else. Or maybe we never find it, and we're always looking for that thing that'll make us happy. Contentment, we look for what makes us feel content. But the strange thing is that contentment, if we're not content and we're looking to find it, the very act of looking to become content, if I just have a relaxing day, if I get away from the kids, if I I don't have to work today, the very kind of attempt to find this something of contentment that we're missing already creates a kind of an inner lack of being okay, a sense of needing something. And so you can't really ever, from this dualistic point of view, you can't ever get to contentment. It's not possible. And what I'm talking about is how our mind works. This is the personal mind, the individual mind that we all have is operating in this way. We look for peace, or we look for excitement. I was talking to someone who's from out of state the other day, who'd been married for 20-some years in a loveless, sexless marriage, and finally got out of that. And he has these women who are interested in him. he's well off and these women are well off and they're attractive. And so there's two women, and one of them is kind of independent and tells him how he should eat and how he should look, and is shaping him up, and making him more of a guy or whatever she thinks. And she's kind of elusive. She's there, and then she goes on these trips and she comes back, and then there's another woman who just adores him. She just loves him, and she's well off, and she's at least as attractive as the first woman. This is all according to him. I haven't met either of them. And she has great friends and is wealthy, and he says, well, yeah, but it's kind of boring. This unconditional love is just not very exciting. And so I tried to give him some advice. Well, this other woman, you're going to have ups and downs, you're going to have excitement, and then she's gone. And then she heard he invited the unconditionally loving woman to go on this, to go somewhere with him, because the first woman rejected it. As soon as she found out the loving woman was going to go, she said, no, I'm going to go. So you can get it's kind of see. But he's all, he hasn't had that kind of excitement of someone who's elusive like that. And so, against my advice, that's what he's going for. So I'm just using that as an example of each one of us. We have some idea of what's going to make us happy, and sooner or later he's going to be kind of disappointed, in my opinion. But for now, excitement is what he's wanting and going after. Some of us like being adored. Narcissistic people, just all that they care about is being adored in whatever way they can get that. Some of us are seeking a partner, some are seeking love of one kind or another. So we're trying to get these things, and our life is made up of that. That's what keeps us busy, trying to get these things that are going to make us happy or fulfilled or whatever it is we think we need and we don't have. And then there are things we avoid, like there are qualities that pain, we don't want to have pain, so we do what we can to avoid that. We don't want to be fearful, and this is what keeps psychotherapists busy. Psychotherapists earn good income because of this kind of the way we live. We don't want to be anxious, and so we try to avoid feeling that, whether it's situations or whether it's within ourselves. And we try to mask it with medications, and we try to avoid loss. We try to hold on to whatever it is that's giving us some satisfaction, thinking that it'll be there forever, or we want it to be there forever, and not recognizing things are always changing and evolving and turning into something else. And so the suffering that we feel in the world, the emotional suffering, always comes when we are not willing to let go, when we're trying to hold on to something, either past its time or something that really doesn't belong to us, and it's that resistance to letting go and opening to what comes when we let go. That's what causes suffering. When we feel able to let go and not try to cling to and hold on to, then we don't experience emotional suffering. So you might ask yourself, we could have a whole discussion about it, but I don't know if we necessarily will right now, but just ask yourself, what is it that I'm seeking? What is it that I'm trying to get, that I put my effort into, that I struggle, that I'm trying to achieve, and how is it working for me? And is it worth the struggle and the effort to do that? Now, I'm not arguing against all struggle in the world. I remember when I was 10 years old, I grew up in Philadelphia, kind of a street kid, poor, and mixed very mixed ethnicities, and one of the fathers one day took a group of us to play softball to a park. I was 10, I never played softball. We didn't have all these little leagues and all this, so we went to the park, and someone would throw the ball, big softball, and I would miss it by about this much. And I'd try it again, and I'd miss it again, and I just couldn't hit the ball. And I was a little embarrassed because some of the kids had a little bit experienced. So for some reason, I decided I was going to be the best player. And I would go take my bike to this park. It was about a mile and a half away every day, and find people who are playing, usually kids that were older than me, and just play and practice every day. So, there was my ego ideal, to be the best player, and I worked at it, and pretty soon I got pretty good. So I'm sure we've all experienced that. I'm not trying to say that having an ideal and trying to reach something is negative. It can lead us to the success in life, what we would call success and accomplishment. But there's a price of not feeling at ease. There's a price of trying and efforting. And while it may work in terms of accomplishments in the world, it doesn't work in terms of finding satisfying and lasting fulfillment and happiness within ourselves. So many good things happen out of my struggling to be the best player. A coach from a high school saw me as a 12-year-old or 13-year-old. 3 years later, he asked me to go to school in his district to play ball for him. I was that good already. And then I did that, and having done that, it got me into a scholarship into a really good college, and so it shaped my life in many ways that were positive. But we're talking here, though, about what's really basically fulfilling and lasting fulfillment and a lasting state of peace or contentment or even pleasure. So it doesn't work in that area to be struggling. And so our life is filled with trying to achieve this and being frustrated and trying to get rid of this and so on. And we assume that's just how life is. That, that's how life is. We just do the best we can. But perhaps there's another way. I tell you these personal things because maybe they're fun or interesting, and because there's some lessons sometimes. So when I was in this college now I got into because of my partly sports and academics, I volunteered for a weekend because I wanted to be a psychologist. They had a weekend at the state mental hospital for to be with someone who was in the mental hospital. In my case, it was a schizophrenic person who'd been there for a while, and spend time with him. So this was sponsored by the Quakers, called Society of Friends. I don't know if you all know who Quakers are. So they invited us, this group of us that were doing that, to come to their Sunday service. And the Quaker Sunday service, there's no minister. They sit around in a group and they just sit silently and meditate. And maybe for 45 minutes or so. And if someone feels inspired during that time, they might get up and say whatever inspiration they had during the week or whatever came to them. And if nobody gets up, then it's just a silent meeting. So most of the time it's pretty silent. And so I went there to explore this meditation. I never sat in silence before for any 5 minutes even. So this was pretty strange, unusual experience for me to just sit there, but I kind of liked it. But they didn't give any instruction as to what to do. So I would sit there and, here I am in this quiet. Well, I'd like to feel peaceful, so I'll just think peaceful thoughts. And I'll repeat the word, I didn't know about mantras, but I'll just repeat the word peace to myself. And that's how I'll meditate. I just made up my own meditation. So I would sit there and say, peace, peace, just silently, inwardly, peace. And just think peaceful things, and imagine a flower garden or whatever. And this is squeaky. And as I did that, after about 30 minutes, these unpeaceful thoughts would come to me. I don't know from where or how, but I begin to think about, I don't know, this is uncomfortable. I don't know if I like being here. Or thoughts like, I don't like what that guy said to me the other day. I'm kind of annoyed at him. So non-peaceful thoughts would start coming, and I try to push them out of my mind. Look, I'm here to be peaceful, and I don't need these thoughts. Come back, peace, peace, peace. And the more I did that, the stronger these thoughts would come. But I liked the experience, so I went back the next week, and the same thing happened, and the next week, and these unpeaceful thoughts got stronger and stronger, and pretty soon I was sitting there feeling napalm going off, and explosions and murders, seriously, all these opposite of what I was intending or wanting. And I'm going to take this off, I think. You can still hear me, can't you? Yeah, I still hear me. Just experiment. Feels a little unnatural. So this is, I learned a lesson from that, and it's a lesson that has proved to be meaningful through my life, is that whenever we try to suppress one side of these polarities, whenever we try to avoid it, we don't really get rid of it. We do either push it into the unconscious, or we actually give it energy by trying to suppress it. It's like, with Trump. It doesn't matter if you like him or not. All he cares about is you're giving him energy by hating him or by loving him, and he's drawing your energy. So when it comes to these opposites, by thinking I want to be good and not a good person, but not a bad person, trying to avoid that side of yourself, because I'll come to this later, we are all things. We're not good or bad. We're not successful or a failure or ugly or beautiful. We're everything. And we're trying to be one thing and not the other. And so when we do that, the thing we're trying not to be gets that energy of avoidance, of judgment, and it fights back. It's like if you have a kid, a child, and you ignore the child, and the child wants your attention. The child, most children won't just go away. They'll do something to get your attention. Maybe they'll spill something, or they'll do something naughty. If that would get your attention, they'll do naughty things, and they'll that'll be their identity. So if we were to give good attention to that child, good attention meaning a caring, accepting, looking at the child, giving energy, acknowledging for whatever the child's doing, it wouldn't get stuck in that need to get attention in a particular way, and that wouldn't become so important. So it's like all these qualities within us are like children. The part of me that feels insecure, the part of me that's anxious, the part of me that's doubtful, for example, they're like, in my thoughts and my emotions, they're like children, and they're wanting my attention. and they're wanting, I can give them attention that says, get out of here, you're bothering me, I don't want to be anxious, I'm going to get rid of you, I'm going to go to my therapist and get rid of you, I'm going to fix this, I'm going to, then that part doesn't go away, it gets more ferocious, and I'm going to have my way here, and you're not going to get rid of me. And that's true with all these polarities. Unless we embrace them all, we're all in a struggle trying to get somewhere and avoid something, and it creates stress for us, it creates a lack of contentment, it creates an efforting quality. We're always efforting, never like just okay, just being. That for most of us, that's rare. And so, how do we get there? Is that the only possibility? Most people would say that's life, as I said, and that's how it is. And I'm just living life the best I can. But there's some people that suggest that there's another possibility, that there's another way of experiencing, that's only one mode of consciousness. Dualistic consciousness is only one mode, and there are many modes of consciousness. We just happen to, in this time in history, grow into that perspective. And we could even talk about historically when this subject-object mode of consciousness became so predominant. And you can trace it even in art to the time of Leonardo, when artists began to develop a sense of perspective. Like, I'm here looking at that, and their paintings took on the qualities of perspective. Then Picasso came along much later, and he's talking about multiple perspectives, that we're moving into a new era where we're at least those of us that have evolved more are losing that. But most of our culture is still in that. It's me looking at objects or relating to objects. Everything is subject and object. In contrast to Martin Buber wrote a book called I and Thou, and contrasted this I-it relationship with an I-thou relationship, where one is intimately connected with whatever one is in relation, with whatever our attention turns to, because we're always in relationship, having a what you might call a spiritual or sense of oneness in our connection, rather than a subject relating to an object. And so, how do we experience that? Because if we try to reach any of this sense of oneness from this subject-object, the subject-object, we're always incomplete, looking for something. And if we're looking for contentment, or if we're looking for oneness, if we're looking for peace, the very act of not feeling peaceful and thinking that something is going to bring us peace is already creates a sense of discomfort in ourselves. It's antithetical to the very thing that we want to be. And so you can't get there, you can't get to peace, you can't get to fulfillment from this personal self who lives in this subject-object consciousness. And so people try to meditate, but they tend to meditate applying what they already know, like I want to be relaxed, so I'm going to meditate. And then thoughts start coming. It's true for everybody. The mind is always thinking about the future and the past. That's all it knows how to do. That the mind is set up to, it's like a computer that processes information. So information comes in through the senses. So I'm feeling warm. Before I can call it warm, there's a feeling, a sense that I have. I'm feeling unpleasant or I'm feeling pleasant. Those are words applied afterward, but the sensory, there's a quality in every moment. If we just tune into what we're sensing, there's a quality in every moment. And so the sensing or listening, there's a present moment awareness. And that present moment awareness is distinct from the mind that's living in this subject-object world. And we're not taught about that, in school or in home, maybe exceptionally. We're not taught. We're taught about how to function better in this dualistic world, and how to get what will make us better off and successful. But rarely are we taught, hey, there's another way to be too, and that is to be here in the present moment. And when we meditate, all we know is trying to get somewhere, so no matter what the teacher is teaching, the first tendency is to sit there and, okay, am I doing it right? Is that person doing it better than me? Or, here I'm having all these thoughts and I shouldn't be, and I can't stop them, so I can't meditate because I'm busy thinking. So the mind goes through all these permutations and isn't really, you can see I sat and meditated, but it's not really meditation. It's just sitting and letting the mind run the way it usually does. So meditation is an entirely different mode of experience. It's an experience in which you're in the moment, and the mind may still, it's not again a battle. From the point of view of the mind, it would see it as a battle that I've got to stop the mind in order to meditate. It's either one or the other. But the mind doesn't have to stop. It's just that we can choose to listen or sense in the moment how it is. And the mind's going to want to define it or evaluate what we're sensing or sort of take over. It's used to taking over and running the show. And we could just choose not to go there. Let the mind do what it's going to do, but I'm going to just choose come back to sense what's here in the moment. And that's an avenue for experiencing another way of being. So let me back up and put it in some context. In Western religions, what we learn is still dualistic. We read from the Bible, God created the world in 7 days, or however we, and the idea that's mostly promoted is that God is here and God created something, and that something is separate from the creator of this. Whether you call it God or intelligence, but in the Western tradition, there's this idea that God created something separate from itself, himself, herself. And there's a relationship between struggle and all these dramas between this created, us as created, and this something that created us. So it's dualistic, and just as we've been talking about, a dualistic view of the world. That's not there in any of the original spiritual traditions have transcended that view. There's been a teacher, whether it was Jesus or Buddha or Krishna or go on, where people and mystics like William Blake and so on, were people who had an experience that transcended this subject-object consciousness and tried to explain as best they could in words something that's beyond words. But then institutions get a hold of that, and so whatever religion it is, whether in Buddhism or Christianity or Judaism, people who interpret that begin to turn it into this subject-object way of being. And instead of the tradition being able to bring us into that original state of non-duality or oneness, we instead find ourselves with people who are authorities telling us what we should believe, and rituals that may have lost their ability to connect us to that oneness. And so in the Eastern traditions, there's much more direct acknowledgement that whatever manifested all of this, God, intelligence, the Divine Mother, whether you personalize that or talk about it as consciousness, these are all attempts to kind of categorize something by the mind that's beyond that. But these are the words we use that give a sort of a sense of what this greater awareness of oneness might be. And in the Eastern traditions, it's very clearly said that that God or divinity did not create the world, but manifested itself, herself, itself, hisself, as all of us and all of this. Now that initially may not seem like much, but it's a vast difference. It's saying that the consciousness of oneness is who we are. Nothing is separate. We're not this separate personal self that we've imagined ourselves to be. We are an expression of that divine consciousness, and we are no different than that. It's very different to say there was a book called The Three Christs of Ypsilanti that was written about three people in the mental hospital, each of them thinking they were Christ. They were in the mental hospital at the same time, and each of them thought, I'm Christ, and they would argue with each other and so on. But it's not, this is what we're talking about, is not an inflated sense of I'm special and I'm wonderful and you can learn from me. We're talking about that everything that exists, every person, everything that exists is not only an expression of divinity, but has every aspect of divinity, is every aspect of divinity, and that we're just, each of us waking up to that. Each of us that feels somehow not in touch with that is gradually getting more and more awakened to that's who and what we are. And that life is, from this understanding, is a process of recognizing that that divinity, that I, you, everything. There is no I in you. Ultimately, there's just this one consciousness, and that consciousness is so vast and inclusive and has so many levels that we're just on a journey at sort of beginning to wake up to that sense of oneness at a certain sort of level of comprehensiveness. And many people on a path of so-called awakening or enlightenment, they get to a certain level and they think, I've arrived now, I'm awakened, I'm enlightened, and as far as they are, my sense is that there's still another, if they let go of that sense of now I'm arrived or who I am now, if they let go of that, they'll arrive at a more and more comprehensive, every time we let go, we'll arrive at something greater and more expansive. And there's no end to this process. And so this letting go for us is very painful. This very process of coming into a greater awareness of oneness at whatever level we were working, the letting go is always painful. Who wants to let go of my personal self and it's about dying. Dying for most people is very scary. This is what I know, this is what I value. I have to give up my body, I have to give up my favorite car, my children, it's for most people, death is frightening. That's only one example, but there's dying that occurs at every level of life. And and to whatever extent we're clinging to what is familiar and having security in that, then that letting go that's inevitable to happen becomes a very difficult, emotionally, extremely painful situation. And that's most of what brings us emotional pain in life. So the process of waking up is a process of dying and letting go. And it's interesting that we find that in people who use psychedelics. Koji, can you turn so we have more light? Yeah, put the shades up.
Stop there.
Yeah, no, too high. People are getting... There you go, stop.
Good.
Oh, we can turn some lights on too, well, if you want.
It's nice.
These two lights. So one of the interesting things about psychedelics is that it brings people into, it sort of, there's lots of ways to talk about it, but it destructures these categories, good and bad. It destructures the subject-object, the dualistic way of experiencing. It brings us into a consciousness that's free, more or less, of those categories. And we feel directly a sense of oneness, a sense that, well, I'm not separate. I look out at the clouds in the sky, and it's not me separate looking out at objects out there, but the me disappears to some degree or to completely. And there's just a realization, a direct experience of this sense of non-duality in various ways, whether it's with another person or within oneself or in nature or relating to art or in all aspects of oneself. And so what's happened is that I mentioned in religious traditions, there's a loss of that direct awareness of oneness that started that tradition. And it becomes taken over by those who want to be telling people what to do and how to be, and this is good, and you should be celibate, or you should be this, or you should be that, or you should be non-attached to the world. I don't know, non-attachment is a word that I used to find used a lot in spiritual traditions, that we should be non-attached. And then we won't be suffering, if you're not so, it's not so important to have this and have that, you can be at peace and not suffering. So a lot of people, though, misunderstand, most people I think misunderstand what non-attachment is. They think it's like, I'll distance myself from the world and I'll be more or less not at its effect. Well, that's called dissociation. There's another word for that. And it's called spiritual bypassing is another word for that. So, and I misunderstood that. I thought non-attachment is, because that was my tendency, my growing up, I couldn't be in a group like this. I would be, if I was in a group, I go for a weekend retreat, even in my 30s, with a group like this, and whenever we had a break, I'd run to my room. I was so awkward and didn't know how to relate to people that I was naturally detached in this. I guess I didn't have to learn non-attachment, at least in that sense. I thought, and I had learned, it's okay to tell you these personal things. I thought, and I had learned from the more ancient traditions that in order to be enlightened, you got to leave this world behind. You got to, not be involved. I became a swami, which is like a monk, which fit my predilections already. So I wasn't learning much. I was just using spirituality to avoid the way I had my whole life. That makes sense? And wondering how much to share a personal thing. So one weekend I was invited by, there's a Sufi teacher named Pir Vilayat Khan, who's a well-known, one or two most well-known Sufi teachers in England and the US at that time. He's passed on now. And he was sponsoring a weekend on Columbia University, not by Columbia, but on their university, using a room in their campus, a big room, 300 people or so. So I was invited along with him and a rabbi named Zalman Schachter. You know him?
I've heard the name.
Yeah, he's a rabbi, well-known, respected rabbi who also is interested in LSD. And so the three of us, and the Sufis, their view is like to respect all spiritual traditions. That's their primary focus. So he invited a swami and a rabbi and himself, and we're gonna learn from all these different traditions. And so he gave a talk, and then I gave a talk about kind of renouncing the world in order to, and being non-attached in order to experience oneness. And that's emotional for me. In the middle of my talk, Rabbi Zalman gets up and says, "This is bullshit." In front of 300 people. I can't listen to this anymore. The Sufi, Pir Vilayat, says, now we're going to respect all religions. Everybody has their point of view and they're all valid. He's trying to smooth things over. And I don't know, I'm just sort of stunned, So, we got interrupted, and I kind of went on after being stunned, and I didn't know what to do. So anyway, the rest of it went okay, but years later, I realized he's completely right. I didn't realize it at the time, but I agree with him that I was avoiding, and in the Jewish tradition, there aren't any monks. All the rabbis are married, and they value relationship as spirituality in relationship. And so Pir Vilayat, that weekend, his father was named Hazrat Ania Khan. He was a famous musician. And the tradition in the Sufis, in that tradition, is passed on from father to son to son. His son, I met his son at that time, he was about 5 at that conference, and now he's the leader, and Pir Vilayat's passed on. So having come from this musical background, Pier of Belay invited me to this musical kind of gathering. It probably was wonderful, but I declined to go, being in my non-attached. And well, those are a couple examples of living this kind of point of view of this idea that non-attachment means somehow cutting yourself off from this world in order to reach some higher state. And that's the way that the spiritual traditions have been for many years, with that point of view. And I think we're coming into a new era now where we're beginning to appreciate that an opening to higher consciousness does not have to lead to disembodiment, that we can be embodied and fully present, and even more present and more in our bodies and more in natural joy and fulfillment as we come into presence and into oneness, and learning how to bring that, not bring it, but express that or live that in the world rather than escaping from the world. And whether it's through spiritual traditions or individually, people tend to become, not whether they call it non-attachment, we many of us, and me included, would do this, sort of set, I'm trying to think of the word, sort of governors on ourselves, like a governor on a car. You can only go this fast. Well, we put these governors, and I can only feel this much. I can only allow myself to let go this much. It's not safe to do more than that. So even if we're not in exploring non-attachment as a spiritual thing, that's already something many of us do. We disembody ourselves. We limit how much embodiment we can experience. And so psychedelics are one way to that we can open up and find a new way of being that is more embodied, that is more present, that is more fulfilled, and less relating to the world in terms of what I don't have and need, and relating to the world in terms of this fullness of being and just sharing and enjoying the sharing in that fullness. So that's one way that psychedelics can help that. But then we come back after taking the psychedelic, and we don't stay in that mode of consciousness. We may remember it. It may affect us. It may change us, but still, we still haven't fully integrated ourselves into that state of oneness. And so we may take them again and learn more and learn more. And another aspect of that, so another way to come into that state of oneness is through meditation. That's not what I've been describing before, but a meditation that comes from learning to choose to come into the moment, not like an idea, like the mind is not going to do that. The mind can't do that. But when we're sitting in the moment, we can, thoughts will come, and we can choose simply to recognize that oneness, that non-dualness, is not something for me to acquire or to reach. This is already who I am. Psychedelics show us that, but we can also, by coming into the moment, begin to discover that well-being is already who I am. And it's just because I got distracted and thought I got to get this, and efforting here and struggling and efforting, that I never looked to see. If I'm just here, if I just come back to now, sense in the moment, this non-efforting consciousness is already who I am. It's not acquired. There's nothing to acquire. Nothing at all. Everything. My alignment with all that exists is already here if I just look inside in the moment without getting caught up in interpreting and evaluating and all this other stuff. So that's the process of meditation, is honoring the mind for what it can do, and if it comes up in meditation, just being non-judgmentally allowing that too. That's who I am too. I don't have to struggle with any part of myself. And I can choose just to go into the sensing and explore what's here in the moment. What's here is my thinking. Okay, what else is here? And we'll do some of that.